Hey guys, welcome to Cutting Edge Podcast with CS Joseph, September 2021. And anyway, I got something kind of more of a continuation of a previous Cutting Edge episode that we've done earlier, and a lot of it has to do with worldview. And worldview, like, for example, actually, the best example of worldview, I'm probably just going to straight up share my screen for this. So going inside of Ucha right here, and we're still making some changes. Like for example, we actually put Affinity and Arsenal at the top because we realize people starting with these end up getting even more accurate results. And I could say we're about definitely well over 9 over 10 accuracy. 9 out of 10 accuracy, probably 9.5 out of 10 accuracy at this point. But anyway, oh, and you notice all those things disappeared in TypeGrid? Well, you just hit the tips button and they come back. So, but I want you guys to like kind of focus on this section right here in Ucha: worldview, affiliative, pragmatic, systematic, interest, abstract, concrete. And from a worldview point of view, you also recognize that you have the temperaments, and the temperaments from. Let me let me actually open up the document here. Let's see here if I can actually share my screen with a specific document. There we go. I'm gonna set this over here as well. All right, cool. So going in here, let's go to the actual type grid in this document here. All right, cool. So guardians, artisans, intellectuals, and idealists. And we've talked many times is that when we're looking at, worldview, or also known as the temperaments, basically from a perspective of the type grid, guardians prefer a political system that is akin to oligarchy. Artisans, and I just realized this was misspelled this whole time. Whoops. I'm going to write that down to have that fixed. Artistans. Wow. Artistans. That's an interesting thing. Um, Artisans prefer basically anarchy or some type of gang related society. Intellectuals prefer an autocracy, and idealists are like communist, communalism, socialism approach from a government point of view. Uh, for the sake of understanding, let's actually, as part of the foundation for tonight's presentation, let's actually like look up some of those things. So let's look up an autocracy. Government in which one person has controlled or unlimited authority over others. A government or power of an absolute monarch. A nation state or community ruled by an autocrat. Unlimited authority, power, or influence over one person or group. This effectively is dictatorship, or I mean, some people would say fascism, but I don't think the definition of fascism entirely matches that. Let's actually look up fascism real quick. A governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism. Well, the reason for that is because racism and nationalism often go hand in hand, because in order for nationalism to work, you would have to put your ethnic group above others, etc. And a philosophy. Okay, so yeah, no, that's not like that great of a. Let's go back. And then number three, a political movement that employs the principles and methods of fascism, especially the one established by Mussolini in Italy by 1922 through 1943. Regardless, it's basically an offshoot of autocracy, except some other aspects of fascism, from a worldview standpoint, is that fascism is usually when government and business have also combined. So there's an aspect there that made that that puts fascism in a different category than, or at least a subcategory of autocracy, even though it's still a form of autocracy. So that's a thing. So and this is important because when you're looking at the type grid, and we've discussed this on a cutting edge episode in the past, is that guardians, artisans, intellectuals, idealists, each of them generally have, according to their worldview, their own preferred form of government. But as we know throughout history, regardless of which form of government exists, none of them actually work. Another aspect for idealists could also be theocracy. That's another component for idealists. But it's usually when guardians and idealists combine, when SJs and NFs combine, where it's not just sole SJ or it's not just sole NF. They can combine underneath a form of religious theocratic approach in terms of their preferred form of government. And that's basically when you have the affiliative types combining. If you get gangs and the anarchy of artisans mixed in together with the autocracy of intellectuals, you're kind of looking at fascism, like probably fascism in the worst form. So like these are additional forms of government when you have all of the pragmatic combining together and working together, or you have all of the affiliative together and working together, which a lot of people just kind of don't understand, from that point, from that point of view. That being said, we're going to be looking at something different. I know that we've talked about, as we're talking about right now, that, worldview in terms of, government authority or different authority types, authoritarian, etc. But we're going to be actually applying that to, our daily lives. We're also going to be applying that directly to looking at some core differences between pragmatic versus affiliative behavior and define them a little differently, right? So let me just double check my show notes here, just so I am on the right track, because there's something I need to do before I go into that. Okay, yeah. Because this actually directly impacts masculine and feminine relationships, and a lot of people aren't actually aware of this phenomenon, that people's worldview and how they approach their preferred forms of government basically end up going in a completely different direction when it comes to understanding how the affiliative and how the pragmatic actually permeates people's relationships, even all the way into the bedroom, which can be really frustrating. And we all know that oftentimes you hear people talk about how the government should have no right to declare what is a legal or illegal marriage. The government should stay out of the bedroom, etc., should stay out of the family, which I quite agree with. But there's definitely something far more insidious about people's worldviews when it comes to social norms within any society. And we're going to be talking about that today. So let's continue. Let's continue with that here. All right, cool. So my mind is like all over the place today, and I kind of feel like I'm distracted, although I'm not really sure what I'm distracted by. So having a hard time reaching the main point that I'm trying to make here. So So let's talk about why government, why society actually exists in of its own right. And I just want to show like how there's some hypocrisy even amongst pragmatic types about these things. And because remember, like, when you're talking about affiliative people have this thing where they see themselves as people who are doing the right thing, and then they compare themselves to pragmatic people who they automatically assume are not doing the right thing. And this is what causes an affiliative person to elect themselves an authority. And this is why affiliative people, in terms of government, are very authoritarian. So we're going to look at a political spectrum grid so that you all can see what I'm talking about here. I'm trying to find a good option here. Is this a good enough grid? That I could barely see that one. Hold on, let me try to find one where you can actually read it. Okay, no. Let's see. Okay, I guess we'll have no choice but to use this one. So there we go. All right. So most people see politics in terms of, okay, you know, we have what's on the left, which are the progressives, and you have people on the right, and those are the conservatives. And most people only see the political spectrum in terms of left and right. And this is a misnomer. This is actually inaccurate. It's actually four-dimensional in this regard. Although you could say it's five-dimensional if you count people who are at the center, known as the centrists, basically. And then you have people who are more authoritarian, and you have people who are more libertarian. And let's actually define what these things are. So let's look at what authoritarian actually means here. Authoritarian, favoring complete obedience or subjection to authority as opposed to individual freedom. So authoritarians value obedience and being subject to authority over individual freedom. And oftentimes the reason why they do this, the reason why affiliative people do this, is because they want to become the authority one day. So they believe, and this is a cognitive projection, they believe, this is a belief, it's also a myth. It's a myth that affiliative people follow, that if they submit to authority, then one day they are more likely able to become an authority, and people will have to submit to them. Okay? All affiliative people do this. Every one of them. Every one of them. 8 of the 16 types are affiliative, and all 8 of them behave this way. It's hilarious to me. It's really funny, because if you look at the affiliative people here, ENFJs, well, they like to see themselves as in charge. They have a hard time listening to everybody else, even though they expect everyone to listen to them. ENFPs are always like, rah, 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 I'm the champion, I'm championing this thing, follow me, follow me. INFJs, you know, they're going to save the world someday, right? Follow me, I'm like Gandhi, I'm like Jesus, LOL, you know, we got this. Or the INFP, I'm the puppet master in the shadows, you know, and I definitely allow myself to have the rights of the first night. So if you're getting married in my city, well, guess what? I get to screw your bride before you do on the first night. LOL. You know, INFPs sure love that crap in those days. And then you have the ISFJ Knight, and it's like, okay, yeah, you know, I'm going to submit to authority so that I could become an authority because I have the experience to be able to protect you from yourself, etc. And same kind of thing with the ISTJ. Oh, my ideas are, and I'm so knowledgeable, so you got to put me in charge because I got the most knowledge here. And then ESFJ is that I need to rule so that I can make sure everyone is cared for. And the ESTJ is like, well, I've worked the hardest and I've been around the longest, so you better give me the authority, etc. So at the end of the day, all of the affiliative types submit to authority because they are wanting to become the authority. Whether or not they're willing to admit it or not, this is a fact. And all 8 of the affiliative types do this. And it's really frustrating and kind of gross, and allows me to essentially judge affiliative types in general as sellouts, basically. These are the people that Benjamin Franklin would typically say, those who trade individual freedom for security and safety deserve neither. And that's definitely a real thing. And that's where you get SJ types are especially and particularly guilty of that, guardian types. They're the first ones to submit to authority. They're the first ones lining up to get COVID-19 vaccines, for example. They're the first ones willing to swallow the 9/11 narrative that two planes crashing into buildings, even though they were technological works of art, was somehow able to like jet fuel melting steel, LOL, and then cause buildings to crash to the ground. Yeah, right. Okay. But, the SJs are the first ones to swallow that and force everyone else to listen to that narrative anyway. And they're even willing to go fight wars and kill people for the Bush administration, for that. And since the majority of our military is made up with SJs, that's just kind of, how they roll. So thank you, SJs. You got a lot of blood on your hands. Thank you very much. So it's because, bloodshed has been normalized. It's been normalized. People see it as normal, right? Because the narratives behind the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan have been normalized. And it's easy to normalize because 40% of the population responds pretty well to normalization. So you can take any narrative and just make it socially acceptable, and then automatically the FJs of the SJs will accept it. And then the FJs, the idealists, will also support those. So then you have the FJ cycle, where you have just the FJs being shown, which is kind of frustrating. What did happen on 9/11? No one really knows. All I know is that the narrative that is told is false, and I highly doubt Muslim extremists actually did it. I severely doubt that, especially when considering Al-Qaeda was actually a creation of the Central Intelligence Agency as a result of the training they provided the Mujahideen when they fought against the Russians. So hashtag BS. It's BS. The whole thing is BS. Your world history is bullshit. Welcome to reality. So, but hey, the Guardians and the FJs, the idealists, are the ones that are definitely going to be swallowing that blue pill, right? Definitely swallowing that blue pill, and that could be a problem. But going back here, these are the authoritarians. The affiliative people are on the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right. So what does authoritarian left mean? Who are the authoritarian left? Who are they from a political standpoint? Well, let's actually go look at it right here. The authoritarian left are the idealists. They're the authoritarian left. It's like, hey, I'm so progressive, free love, Woodstock, transgenderism, anything goes. As long as it makes you happy, man. If it feels good, do it. It's all good. You know what I'm saying? But guardian types are typically more conservative than progressive, typically. And so this is what makes up the authoritarian right. The authoritarian right. And it's so interesting because, you have the Bush administration, which is considered a right-wing administration. And, George Bush himself is, guess what? You heard it, an ESFJ. This is why everyone thought he was stupid, because he had TI inferior. Okay. That's why everyone thought George Bush was stupid. Should I cue up that little scene of some guy throwing a shoe at him right now? You see what I'm saying? So, yeah. He was an ESFJ. He was very cavalier. Like, we're going to ride our horses in there, and we're going to completely own everything in Kabul. We're going to completely own everything in Baghdad. I'm a starter type. We're just going to start all these wars. I ain't going to finish them, but I'm certainly going to start them, etc. And then our military goes in there and shoots people for the Bush administration. Congratulations. You played yourself. So this is a thing. This is what happened. And so the SJs make up the authoritarian right, whereas the idealists, the NFs, make up the authoritarian left by and large. Granted, there's some outliers there, but for the most part, most of the time, that's where they stand. And then you look at the libertarian side, the libertarian left and the libertarian right. And I'm not saying the pragmatics are even any way better. What does the libertarian left look like? Well, the libertarian left is, hey man, I get to do whatever I want. The artisans. So if you've ever seen on HBO Max that series called Warrior, which talks about these Chinese gangs that are in San Francisco, etc., or if you've watched Gangs in New York, or if you've watched Fight Club with Tyler Durden, etc., which we have an article coming out about psychoanalyzing Tyler Durden in the very near future if it's not already out yet. But this is the libertarian left. The artisans are the libertarian left. They are all about anarchy. They are all about anything goes, progressivism, true freedom. It's all about my pragmatism. It's all about my individual freedom. It's all about what I want, regardless of the consequences to anybody else. And if it causes consequences to other people, that's on them, because if they ain't strong enough to deal with it, oh well, it's not my problem. I was strong enough to get what I wanted, but they're not strong enough to give me proper blowback or defend against that, oh well. It's not my fault that I'm robbing them and they're too weak. It's like, wait a minute, what? Okay, thank you, I guess. And then the intellectuals is the much rarer libertarian right. The libertarian right. Which oftentimes libertarian right is what does give it's where those are what people call those right-wing white male extremists come from. They are the libertarian right, which is ultimately where National Socialism actually came from. Nazism came from the libertarian right, basically. So the bottom line is that from a political standpoint, people just don't realize that everyone is ultimately this, and no one is right. No one is right. But there are reasons, and for these different political interpretations in terms of, hey, let's organize our world this way, organize our society this way, so that we can have, some benefits. Okay, and why would we do that? Well, let's go back to the dictionary. Okay, let's look at society. All right. An organized group of persons associated together for religious, benevolent, cultural, scientific, political, patriotic, or other purposes. Doesn't that sound like libertarian left and libertarian right? Doesn't that sound like authoritarian left, authoritarian right? So together for religious, okay, so religious, that's theocratic, so NFs. Benevolent, that's also, the communal approach, so that's NFs. Cultural, that could be SJ, Guardian. Scientific, that's very NT. Political is more of a general term. Patriotic, that's libertarian right, which is very NT oriented, or other purposes. Interesting how our own language kind of, follows that same suit. Or a body of individuals living as members of a community, and thusly a community. A body of human beings generally associated or viewed as members of a community. A highly structured system of human organization for a large-scale community living that normally furnishes protection, continuity, security, and a national identity for its members. Yes, please do that more often. And such a system is characterized by its dominant economic class or form. Kind of. I mean, I couldn't exactly make that argument, to someone like Karl Marx. I also couldn't make that argument to John Locke either, because both of them actually have very similar views on, rich people and ultimately the rich. Don't get me started about Thomas Paine and how he got involved in the French Revolution. That's also another example, etc. And to the point where you could almost even say that he was a hypocrite. And of course, most people would make that same claim about, Jefferson, etc., and the other founding fathers who were slave owners, etc. But the thing is that we have no right to judge the past based on the morals and ethics of today. And don't forget that, by the way. So, regardless of what hypocrisy may be, because hypocrisy in of its own right is a subjective term, and what may be one man's hypocrite today may not be a hypocrite tomorrow, or may be a completely different kind of hypocrite next week. You just don't know. Because morals and ethics are very subjective, they change. and they change consistently. And because they change that, people's judgments change along with those shifts, and that includes anything relating to politics or including, social relationships where someone could potentially be a hypocrite. Okay, that's just kind of how it goes. But why have society? Why bother having society? So recently within season 31, I talk about cheap, fast, and right. Pick two, okay? Women are right, okay? Men are cheap, but society is fast. And we're talking about society right here. Society being fast. Society makes everything faster. I'm able to go to the supermarket instead of having to trap animals and kill them and skin them and gut them and clean them and cook them myself and put them away in storage to save the meats and sell beaver pelts or make hats out of beaver pelts or those kinds of things. That is something that I don't have to do because society makes everything fast, and they're continuing to make things even faster now that we're even able to synthesize our own synthetic meats. That's gross, but apparently, Bill Gates is completely okay for it, especially, if it reduces your lifespan because you're more likely to get cancer as a result of eating it because hashtag it's beyond meat. You see what I'm saying? Like, everyone says, like, oh, this is some great, awesome thing. No, it's not. And it's like, well, there's no studies that show that it's bad for you, but yeah, there's no studies that show it's good for you either. So why am I trusting this? It's like the food industry is no different, is no better than big pharma. Like what the hell? But by and large, human beings organize themselves in societies as a result of getting a lot of these benefits from society, and ultimately speed is the main benefit, etc. So from there, though, there's another reason for society. So let's go to UrbanDictionary.com for this next piece. Survival of the fittest. Nice. A Darwinian notion that only those traits best suited to perpetuate the species will endure to be passed along indefinitely from generation to generation, while those traits most detrimental to the good of the species will be phased out after a few generations. This preservation of favorable individual differences and variations, and the destruction of those which are injurious, I have called natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. Quote, Charles Darwin from his book Origin of the Species. So, survival of the fittest. This right here is the crux or the most important point about today's episode that I am trying to make. Survival of the fittest, and how each of the four worldviews or the four temperaments copes with the survival of the fittest. And they do it at a micro level and they do it at a macro level, right? So at a micro level, you could talk about those FJs, for example. Using the television show Vikings, etc. You have the ISFJ main character Ragnar Lothbrok. He is king of the Vikings, basically. And his son is Ivar the Boneless, and he'll never be able to walk. They already know he won't be able to walk because his legs are gnarled, and there's no way that he would be able to walk or does walk, and he doesn't, ultimately. And he's left with a choice to basically kill his son as a baby after he's been born, or to allow the baby to live. And he's very affiliative. And affiliative people like to cope in such a way when it comes to survival of the fittest, because such that affiliative people don't really believe in survival of the fittest. And as much as they may claim that they believe in survival of the fittest, they really don't. Because true to their actions, the ISFJ Ragnar Lothbrok actually decided to let his son Ivar live. And even though he almost killed him, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And instead, he became a barrier between his son and ultimately the survival of the fittest, because his son was basically unfit. And because he was genetically unfit, he wouldn't survive. He wouldn't survive on his own out in the wild, basically. And imagine his son going through a rite of passage to prove his manhood, etc. He even wouldn't even be able to survive the rite of passage. Basically, he'd basically die when he went through a rite of passage. And yeah, so as a result, someone who is unfit, as Ivar the Boneless, ends up, being given an opportunity to live, even though it's completely against survival of the fittest, because of the affiliative nature of his father, the king, right? And the affiliative oftentimes copes by creating society, and this is with idealists and guardians the most, creating a society where it's a barrier against survival of the fittest. And we don't have survival of the fittest in the Malthusians out there. So let's look up what Malthusian is. Let's go back to Urban Dictionary. Malthusian. Malthusianism. Embracing the coming conditions of a precipitous population decline as described by Thomas Malthus with a cheery disposition. Okay, so let's look at Malthus, a negative or a pessimistic person, from The Economist, Thomas Malthus from 1766 to 1834, for his pessimistic and negative views. So, okay, let's see this one, Malthusianism. The theory of the relation of population to a means of subsistence taught by Malthus. Malthus's theory that population increase would outpace increases the means of subsistence, which basically means the more the Earth's population is left unchecked, the less resources they will be. The problem is, though, is that Darwin completely challenges Malthusianism. Malthusianism is consistently practiced by the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right. These are the people who did United Nations Agenda 21, Agenda for the 21st Century. This is why there's fluoride in our water. If you are in an incorporated city in Western society, as per the United Nations Agenda 21, they are required to put fluoride in your water. Fluoride is actually toxic and will reduce your lifespan as you drink tap water every single time. Don't drink it. But it's because they are Malthusian, and they like to come up with ways to secretly or covertly, ultimately, potentially reduce a person's lifespan because they see overpopulation as a problem. And because it's so subtle and it's so small, there's a chance that, like, hey, people are going to, die, but, and ultimately reduces the population over time. That is the entire point behind UN Agenda 21. Also, Jordan Peterson, who I'm not really a fan of, worked on UN Agenda 21, so please check that out so you can have that resource. So, why is this necessary? Because, and that would be the authoritarian left and the libertarian left, basically. Well, the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right, basically. They see themselves as doing the right thing for the environment, for the human race, by culling the weak from a population standpoint. So they institute rules and regulations for certain foods, certain behaviors, certain EPA standards, certain FDA approvals, etc., specifically to make it more difficult for our bodies to live in this environment, ergo increasing stress, ergo reducing our lifespan, so as to make sure that the planet is in some kind of negative population decline because they are afraid of overpopulation destroying the world, essentially. But according to Darwin, this is not so much of a problem, and I'm almost done with this tangent. I'll get back to psychology here in a second. But according to Darwin, this is not really a problem because a species who lacks resources will stop reproducing anyway, and which is fine. So regardless of what these affiliative authoritarian Malthusians desire to do, it would all work itself out anyway. The reason why they're concerned that it might not work out is because they're actually silently admitting that their societies, because SJ society and NF society or affiliative society is literally a buffer between humanity and survival of the fittest. Because without society, anyone that's born with a deformity would ultimately die. They would die. They wouldn't be able to survive. They wouldn't be able to make their rite of passage, for example, if they were a man. They wouldn't be allowed to bear children if they are deformed, etc. If it was a girl, it just not at all. They'd be deformed. They'd be shunned. Survival of the fittest just was like, no, sorry, you're not fit. You're going to die. And that's how harsh it is. And it's so interesting to see the artisans and the intellectuals, the more pragmatic point of view, actually embrace survival of the fittest. And a lot of people aren't realizing that, pragmatism embraces survival of the fittest. This is why you have something called laissez-faire economics. Let's look up laissez-faire economics, because we can. Laissez-faire economics. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Laissez-faire is an economic theory from the 18th century that opposed any government intervention in business affairs. The driving principle behind laissez-faire, a French term which translates to leave alone, literally let you do, is that the less government involved in the economy, the better off business will be, and by extension, society as a whole. Okay? It's literally the economic philosophy of free market capitalism that opposes government intervention. The thing is that if you are authoritarian and authoritarian left or right, you are ultimately all about government intervention because you are authoritarian. The libertarian left and right, they're all about as little government as possible, as little government intervention as possible, especially economically. And this is where capitalism ultimately comes from. Capitalism mostly comes from libertarian right, but the libertarian left certainly enjoys taking part of it, etc. Whereas the authoritarian left would be more the people who have the socialist, communistic tendencies, and the authoritarian right, not so much. So it's complicated. It's a problem. I'm not saying anyone here is correct, but this is where it's at. From a laissez-faire point of view, like the libertarian left and libertarian right, the pragmatic types, the SPs and the NTs, they want to be left alone to conduct business however which way they want. But completely left unchecked, all of a sudden you have pollution, which is a huge problem. You have people being victims of rackets and grifting, etc. Lots of grifter businesses out there that start coming. So there's got to be some kind of government regulation to keep it under control in some way, shape, or form, right? Otherwise, if left unchecked, people would be. You end up getting slave labor at that point. Sweatshops, people being paid unfair wages, cartels start to form, and then also monopolies. A cartel is just an affiliative monopoly, whereas a monopoly is where you have a single group controlling an entire market, versus a cartel where you have multiple groups coming together and all doing the same thing and doing price controlling, right? That's a cartel. But all of which completely screw over the little guy. Screw over families, screw over all this. And that's why the affiliative exists, because it's like, hey, if you're really all about the survival of the fittest, then it's going to ultimately, it becomes a race to the bottom with pragmatic types, because pragmatic types end up treating people like cattle. They end up treating people like a product, like a commodity. They see people as things. So they can take it too far, to the point where anything and everything can be bought and sold. Then all of a sudden you have, Weimar Republic Germany, where women are bought for, as prostitutes and sex trafficked for just pennies every single day. Like literally 4 pennies can get you many hours with any woman you want in Berlin in the 1930s, which is in the 1920s, which is pretty sad. The late 1920s, especially. During the crash of 29, between 1929 and 1933, I believe, or 32, it was some of the absolute worst time or 31, the worst time for women in Berlin because of that. It was like the worst form of Vegas that you could ever see. And it was all thanks to, this absolute, bullshit when it comes to, certain types rising to power and providing, what they think is the best political point of view. It doesn't matter, but everyone is a problem, you know. The point I'm trying to make is that, like, while survival of the fittest is very important, the thing is that when the pragmatic types are left to rule society, it just kind of gets ahead of them, and people end up getting suffered. They end up suffering. They end up getting treated like objects, like things. Everyone gets objectified. Everyone is for sale, basically, and that could be a huge problem. But when the authoritarians or the affiliatives take over, all of a sudden you have people who work really hard, and then all of a sudden they're expected to redistribute their wealth because all of a sudden I'm my brother's keeper. It's my responsibility to pay for baby mamas in Southern California. It's my responsibility to pay for autistic people. It's my responsibility to pay for quadriplegics, people who can't do anything for themselves either, when survival of the fittest would have phased them out entirely. And I'm actually harming the genes of my own species because I'm allowing these people to live, or I'm forced to provide a support structure for those people that natural selection would already deem unfit and would already phase them out genetically. You see what I'm saying? So what's the answer, folks? What's the answer? You have to understand that all of these forces, from a person's worldview within their temperament, is what drives politics. This is actual political science, not that bullshit that you learn out of school or that bullshit that you learn in university. This is true political science. The thing is that people don't really understand. People don't really understand the implications of what it is they're talking about. They don't understand what's they don't understand the consequences of these actions that they're going to take, because you're going to find evil everywhere. You're going to find evil with the affiliatives, because you got that redistribution of wealth problem. You have that degradation and degeneration of people's health over time, because basically society is being babied. And because society is being babied, they become weaker over time, and that can be a huge problem in the long run for our race. But then again, if you let the pragmatics rule, then all of a sudden you have this problem where everyone is objectified and treated like objects. And that too is a problem. That's not going to help anybody. And then basically everyone is in a victim to a form of slavery, under the pragmatic rule. So who's right? Quite frankly, the only way to solve this problem is to have every single one of the worldviews represented at the same exact time. Not necessarily equally. Like I've said before, if you allow society to have everything, to be a democracy, for example, and a true democracy is when everything in the society is decided by popular vote. The problem is that you can't do that. You can't do that. This is why I maintain that democracy should not be allowed to exist. Because democracy is really for the idealists, and sometimes for the guardians, but it's mostly for the idealists, where literally everything in society is decided by popular vote. The problem is that idealists and intellectuals, 15% of the population is, so this is 30% of the population. 30% of the population makes 80% of the money. Whereas the other 70% of the population, they make 20% of the money. But there's 70% of the population. So there's more of these people who only make 20% of the money compared to the lower amount of these people who make 80% of the money. And if everything's decided by popular vote, these people would have the voting power to vote out the wealth out from under these people here. And that's just one economic example as to why a true democracy should never be allowed to exist. So in order to make a better form of government than what we have now, we would have to basically come up with a way so that guardians, artisans, intellectuals, and idealists were all represented, not necessarily equally, but represented fairly, because we would understand these population differences, right? we would understand how the affiliative gets in the way of survival of the fittest, whereas the pragmatics take survival of the fittest way too far. We'd have to have some kind of general standard with which to rule society. Because even someone like Ivar the Boneless, or Ivar the Boneless, who became one of the most famous conquerors in history, he was basically an invalid. He was incapable of walking. He would be something that survival of the fittest would have absolutely annihilated, and he wouldn't have been able to be allowed to exist. But he still got over his own personal afflictions and made something of himself either. Are we able to guarantee that opportunity to every single human being in a society, in our fast society, in our world system, as it were? And the thing is, too, is like we also have to get to the point, like, who are we as human beings to judge, right? And this is why we have to like really, really keep it down to a standard of love your neighbor as yourself, which is the only way, the only true standard with which we can live by in order to develop a necessary or meaningful form of government, etc. So it's a problem. It's a serious problem. Yes, Elliot. Yes. Every now and then you get ESTJs who would be the one type that makes the most money out of the sensing types. But it sure as hell ain't ESTPs. They're too scared to even hire people, for example. It's not ESFJs. You don't often see ESFJs having busies. SFJs are usually followers. They're not entrepreneurs. ISTJs are usually too lazy to actually really do a business on their own. ISTPs are the second most entrepreneurial of the sensors, and they can actually make it pretty well, but still the ESTJ would still make more money than them anyway. And ISFPs, as much as they want to be the leader, they usually end up following because they realize that being a leader takes away their own freedom from their own NI child. So it's not that big of a deal. Whereas the INTP, oh look, we have Elon Musk right here, for example. We also have Bill Gates here, for example, etc. Here's Steve Jobs, here's Tim Cook, here's John Scully, etc. It's pretty obvious that the NTs are the richest of them all. And then you have the idealists, and I do know a lot of rich ENFPs, and there are definitely some rich INFJs, and some amazing traders and day trader experts as mystic INFPs. It's really the ENFJ that struggles and would be the most poor, basically, financially, of the idealists, of the intuitives, would be ENFJs. So yeah, all of which to say is that, like, again, there is no worldview that is best. Everyone has pros and cons, but you have to get all of the competing worldviews to stop competing and start working to each other and have mutual respect for one another in order for a better society to be created. Otherwise, you're going to become a victim of an oligarchy with the guardians, where it's like, if you're not part of the old boys club, you don't have any rights. Or the artisans, if you're weak, you don't have any rights. Or the intellectuals, if you're not intelligent, you don't have any rights. Or the idealists, if you're not a good person, you don't have any rights. You see what I'm saying? And no one person can be all four, right? And this is ultimately where we have this political prejudice. And even the political spectrum within the United States of America is complete and utter horseshit. So it's a problem. INFJs, so Yasmin asks, why would INFJs be part of the rich while ENFJ the most poor when they have SE child and they just get out there so much easier? It's not about getting out there, it's about being intelligent. It's TI child versus TI inferior. Think about it that way, Yasmin. Don't think about it in terms of SE performance. Think about it in terms of just ability to think and think on their own. Consider it from that point of view. Cynthia Payne asks, is ambition an abstract related characteristic? No, not necessarily. It's usually seen as an NI characteristic, but it's not. Anyone could be ambitious. So no. Anyway, the point is that, like, again, you have to really consider, outside of all the socioeconomic pressures put upon from affiliative worldviews versus the pragmatic worldviews, you have to understand that like it's all about how they manage survival of the fittest. The affiliative wants to create a barrier against the survival of the fittest, whereas the pragmatic wants to remove all barriers from the survival of the fittest. Keep that in mind, and keep that in mind in terms of any political decisions that you make personally. Eventually, the Constitution for the United States, it's going to be completely rewritten. Everything is going to be up for grabs on this continent in the very near future. And when that happens, we need to be thinking about these competing worldviews so that we can actually set up a new form of government that does limit the power of the government while simultaneously limiting the power of each of these individual worldviews so that one of these worldviews does not become more powerful than the others. It's very, very critical that we do this. Otherwise, we are at risk of repeating all of our previous mistakes that our race has made when it comes to creating a society. Because a society ultimately ends up becoming a problem. It's like an idol that has to be worshipped itself, and it has its own interests, and it ultimately will subjugate all of the people within it, like what has happened within Western society, as we are on the verge of Western society's total collapse right now. Which is an issue. So, anyway, folks, that concludes this cutting edge episode for September 2021. I will now be happy to take some questions from members in the audience at this time. So if you have any questions about this politically charged discussion, now would be the time while I stuff my face with something Railgun made me. Let's keep the questions on topic, all right? But LJS, how can a 17-year-old INTJ overcome SE inferior? No, do I know? I'm not giving a bad experience. So, LJ, in order to get over rejection, which is what SE inferior is afraid of, you need to basically desensitize yourself to rejection by being rejected as much as possible. So for like the next 5 years or a few years, go out of your way to be rejected. And then you'll stop caring about being rejected, then you'll be okay with being rejected, and just move from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, especially when it comes to like women, for example. Okay. Amartaj asks, would the Middle East be more SJ in general? I think the Middle East is more NF in general, especially since they follow an NF so-called prophet, because for some reason people put faith in Muhammad, even though he's the only prophet that claimed to be a prophet, and none of the prophets before him ever claimed to be a prophet, and he's just a walking contradiction. TE child, oh hey, look at me, I'm Allah's prophet. I'm Allah's prophet. LOL TE child. And it's like, okay, nice proclamation there, bro. Isa didn't do that. See what I'm saying? Isa had other people had to call Isa a prophet. And that's like kind of how it is with like most prophets anyway. So it was just more of a title, a colloquialism given to people who behaved a certain way, etc. Whereas this guy is just assigning this label to himself, for example. And because he's an NF, because he's an ENFP with TI Trickster, and it's so funny watching the Middle East follow a TI Trickster, LOL. This TI Trickster has organized his Quranic society based on his NF principles. So ergo, the Middle East is mostly an NF related society. Except for Israel, which is a libertarian right society for the most part, and then all of a sudden they became an authoritarian right society. So they are authoritarian right. Trunks Obsessed is, question, I noticed the pragmatic type use the words the narrative a lot. Is that a good way to type someone that's pragmatic? No, not necessarily. Bowden is here. Could the distribution of the types be the result of current past societies and change over time? We don't know. I think it has a lot more to do with survival of the fittest, actually. I think that the distribution of the types that we have is based on our race's ability to contend with the earth itself. And if our psyches were not organized in the way that they are, based on the certain percentages of the various worldviews, our race probably wouldn't be able to survive the harsh environment that is the earth. But that's just a theory. Maggie Hess asks, what does society collapse and rebuild realistically look like in your opinion? It looks like revolution, or the collapse of Rome. Check that out. Dude, it's aiming. So how can we bring us together as a society then, while incorporating the approaches through pain, basically pain of death. That's really all it is. Pain of starvation and death. Think the four horsemen of the apocalypse to a point, but it's ultimately pain. People don't unite when they're comfy. They unite when they have a problem to solve, basically, and that's usually as a result of pain. Maggie Hess asks, is it possible, realistic, to form subcommunities throughout the country organized by shared values? Yes, but usually those shared values are still dominated by a singular worldview. It could be an SJ subcommunity or an NF subcommunity or an NT subcommunity or an SP subcommunity. You got to be careful of those subcommunities. Financials are going to be an impediment in some of those subcommunities. Yeah, but some people don't care about financials because they have the skills to survive without money. What am I eating? I'm eating salmon. Yes. Any other questions? Next. Anyone else? All right. If an NT or SP is following the affiliative government, it means nurture overtook their nature. Yes. Yes. The other thing is, too, you got to think about SPs a little bit differently compared to NTs. SPs, their golden pairs are all affiliative, and their subconsciouses are also affiliative. So they're trying, except for the ESFP and the ISFP, but half the SPs are trying to be more affiliative, which is really frustrating if you think about it. So half of the SPs will sell out the other half of the SPs to the affiliative SJs. So you got to watch out for that too. All right. So why didn't COVID help then? COVID didn't help because COVID. Like, think about it. Like, if I'm a pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and supposedly there's this new virus that I have to provide tests for, etc., or people need tests for, and I invent the tests, and then like I have the test, but the test in reality actually just tests for the flu, and the way the test is done is that it's extremely broad in its testing focus, that it's more likely to get a positive result than a negative result with the test, and then I ship that test everywhere, and people are already just trained on how to use my test anyway because I'm a trusted resource, I'm a trusted entity. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, flu statistics have been so low in comparison to COVID statistics, is that people would not really be able to tell the difference. They don't know, they're just trained to do their jobs, right? So it's super easy to manipulate the COVID situation, either from a government point of view, a big pharma point of view, you know, and if I was going to make a bunch of money and, big pharma, and I was a leader of a major pharmaceutical company, I would be friends with other pharmaceutical companies and create a cartel, basically. And as a result of having that cartel, we'd all be able to collude, and through that collusion, create these PCR tests, which, take positive flu detections and make them look like COVID detections, etc. And then do the same thing with the vaccine, so I can increase my bottom line and they can increase their bottom line because, we live in this insanely capitalist society where anyone can be exploited, and it'd be really easy to exploit people, and if I was leader of a pharmaceutical company in that position and I'm pragmatic AF, you absolutely sure as hell I'd make that decision. And I treat everyone like cattle and not give a flying fuck about it because I'm here to make money, because hashtag capitalism. You see what I'm saying? Like that's kind of the world we live in. But oh no, that could never be happening. And it has nothing to do with like Oh, Chase, you can't tell me that a whole bunch of people got together and did something like that. And it's like, it's not about the people. It's not about even the collusion. It's about their personal belief system. It's about the worldview itself. The belief system is what drives the behavior and drives the action. And the fact that something like that is even possible, the fact that the possibility exists, whether or not it is or is not happening, is not even relevant because the possibility exists, and because the possibility exists, that gives me pause. That gives me pause as a human being because something like that should not be possible at all in our society, but it is. And the fact that it is means our society is corrupt. It means our society probably shouldn't be allowed to exist in its current form. That's my problem. Okay, and this that how things are handling with COVID is an example as to why all of the worldviews are completely disjointed and not actually working together for the common good. They're working together for their own good at the expense of everybody else. That's the problem, right? Okay, Trunks says, do you see a singular type as a leader, e.g. president? Well, most people vote for ESTJs or ESJs. Or should it be run by a rep from all types or all the groups by worldview? Honestly, Trunks, I don't have the answers to that question. I'm more actually pointing out problems instead of proposing solutions. Becky Lowe says, my experience is that the Wayfarers seem more monarchical rather than the intellectual. Maybe. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just wish I had more experience that would agree with that. Don't really see that as much with an ENTP and INTP with their FE, whereas the ESFP, ISFP, it's their way or the highway. Of course it is. How does cognitive focus integration affect this? Well, for example, we just talked about how STP types often sell out to the SJs and sell out their SFP brethren to the SJs consistently, and it's usually because they are trying to become more affiliative, and it's especially bad if they are subconscious focused, and they'll sell out their pragmatic types to their SJ counterparts, etc. Where are you going? Huh? Oh, okay. Hey, buddy. All right. What happened, NT, in affiliative government? They are basically like the minority, and they're consistently shat on. Dude, it's Amy says, so need a common legit thing for us to come together to unite us all like Apocalypse or Aliens. Yeah, but even Aliens could potentially be fake. There is some declassified government documents talking about, and this is also in Bill Cooper's book On a Pale Horse, about how to use manufactured or fake alien narrative in order to unite the world against that fake threat so that they could gain the benefits of a united world. Even though there is no actual alien threat, but to make it look like there is an alien threat. This is also heavily explored in Watchmen. I don't know if you guys read the comic books for Watchmen. It's also, there's a series on HBO, which I recommend, although it's insanely racist. It's Watchmen on HBO Max. Check that out. That heavily explores that too. I'm going to create a fake alien invasion narrative in order to unite the world, etc. So that's also a problem. And that's the only way to rid corruption. Yeah, ultimately bloodshed and pain. I mean, the 4 boxes of liberty is really how you get rid of corruption. You get on your soapbox, you start talking about it, and if people don't change, then you go to the ballot box and you cast your vote to make a decision. And if that doesn't change society for the better, then you go to the judicial box and you sue in court. And if the courts fail you, then you go to the ammo box and you basically start shooting people. That's really how it works, the 4 boxes of liberty, and that's the only way that society will ultimately change over time, at least in terms of guaranteeing freedom, etc. So, do you think we'll bring redemption? I'm not entirely sure. Maggie Hess asks, what are you personally, specifically planning to do to prepare for this supposed future collapse? Basically making sure that I have all the skills necessary to survive in a world where I don't need money to live. I don't need money to live. I don't need electricity. I don't need anything. I could be content with nothing. What don't you like about Jordan Peterson? He's a globalist. Cynthia Payne, would NT still support a monarchy dictator even if they're not the individuals in power? In a lot of cases, they would, actually. They would, but mostly a dictator and not a monarchy, because monarchy is based on the premise that their title is God given. Basically, royalty often likes to assume that God backs them in their position, and that's not true. So I don't think NTs would follow a monarchy, but they definitely would a dictator. And Yasmin asks, would the affiliative favor more of a gang society with their subconscious, like an INFJ with an ESTP subconscious, for example? Then, no, no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't want a gang society. Gang society is what everyone's mostly afraid of. In as much as people are mostly vocal against autocracy and dictatorship, the reality of the situation, they are more afraid of a gang-based society. So watch Gangs of New York, or watch Warrior, which is this kung fu show on HBO Max, for example, that basically outline how that works. Do you think abortion plays into the survival of the fittest narrative? No. Well, it kind of does. It's more of it plays into the Malthusian narrative. The thing is, though, is that if a person is conditioned and so profane in their life that they actually think that that they would be willing to commit, you know, to killing their own children, then yeah, that person's genes should probably not be allowed to be passed forward anyway. It's just the thing is that this is where you get into a nurture versus nature argument, because people have been nurtured into thinking that killing their own children is an okay thing. And the Apocalypse of Peter, which was originally part of original biblical canon, it was considered God's word back in the day until the Council of Nicaea ripped it out. The Apocalypse of Peter, when it was part of biblical canon, actually taught again and condemned abortion in all forms. And it also even outlined the specific punishment that would be rendered out to mothers for committing abortion, basically. And the types of tortures that would await them, etc. But the point is that had that book remained biblical canon, I highly doubt abortion would have ever been legalized, especially given the Judeo-Christian influence among Western society today. I don't think abortion would have ever made it. But in order for abortion to have made it, the Apocalypse of Peter had to have been absolutely removed from biblical canon to actually make that happen. Okay. Paloma Martin has asked, but when something puts life at risk, wouldn't people become more selfish, trying to save themselves and betraying others? Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the definition of anarchy. The thing is that they'll realize that they won't be able to survive for long doing it by themselves, and they will have to band together, and that's where the creation of gangs come from. Absolutely. Is cancel culture NF-led or SJ-led? That's a great question. It's technically both. SJs are using cancel culture to protect the norms or the status quo. NFs are using cancel culture to protect their ability to progress or have the progressivism that they want. So it's both, technically. It's technically both. All right. Is that it? Looks like that might be it. Awesome. All right, folks. Well, thank you for watching. This is the cutting edge episode for September 2021. Thank you for coming and enjoying this political discussion. Please keep these ideas in your mind as you make political discussions, and please talk about it with other people. I think people need to understand these nuances so that they stop perpetuating the status quo, because the status quo is not helping. We can have a better society, but we have to make sure that everyone is represented fairly, or at least in a way that makes sense in terms of each of the individual temperaments and worldviews, so that we can actually work to have a better society. Because our current society within the Western society has ultimately failed us. So I definitely don't want that future for my children. I don't want that future for myself even right now. So let's work together to try to create a better future and a better tomorrow. Because if we don't, then I guess we're just gonna have to be content with, the older generation selling our children downriver, and that's not something that I want and anyone else ultimately wants at all. So anyway, um, and yes, Amy, the pragmatic is definitely too silent, and the pragmatic doesn't start getting loud until it's time to consider violence as an option. That's when the pragmatic starts to get pretty loud. So just because remember, guys, like even the Boston Massacre, the shot heard around the world that kicked off the Revolutionary War, those things were actually manufactured, fabricated. They were not spontaneous. They were all orchestrated by the Sons of Liberty to create the Revolutionary War, and the Sons of Liberty was headed up by Samuel Adams, who's an ESTP, and the Sons of Liberty was also funded by the junto, which is a secret society controlled by Benjamin Franklin. Okay, that's what was happening behind the scenes in the Revolution. They orchestrated the Boston Massacre. They just set up the British for failure, and British took the bait. And they were also the ones who fired the first shot at Lexington and Concord. They orchestrated the entire thing. And then it's no different than when the Nazis came to power, where they orchestrated the burning of the Reichstag, and then they blamed the opposition for it, and then everyone voted the Nazis into power, even though the Nazis were the ones that burned down their Capitol building dressed as the opposition. Okay, you have to understand that these people will do anything to get what they want in the end. Understand that that's how the real world works. Not this whole like, oh, let's just believe that airplanes colliding into two towers in New York is definitely the cause of those towers going down. No, it's physically impossible, actually. Any societies or governments in the past best represent this idea of what you speak of, the fusion of the four ideologies? No. The answer is no. Amalgam. The answer is no. So, the answer is no. Anyway, that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the questions. I'll see you guys. I might even see you guys tonight. Later.